Well, within the context of both Pentecost Sunday and the dynamics of race in America, I would like to talk to you today about that which is explicit and that which is implicit. By explicit, of course, I mean that which is obvious, out in the open, for all to see. By implicit, I mean that which is subtle, disclosed, lurking just beneath the surface. Now, for instance, when the Bible says that women should be silent in church and not be permitted to teach or have authority over any man, that is an explicit way of reflecting patriarchal assumptions. It's obvious, out in the open, for all to see. Now, without even casting judgment on whether such assumptions are good or bad, they are obviously, explicitly apparent. Now, on the other hand, when the Bible tells about two different people in a story, and perhaps only one of them is named, and the other is unnamed, well, it's generally the case that the named person is a man, and the unnamed person is a woman. In this case, we see the implicit patriarchal assumptions. They are subtle, disclosed, lurking just beneath the surface. Now, to use another example, the National Socialism movement of Hitler's Germany promoted a master Aryan race, one that possessed greater strength, intelligence, and ability than any other in the history of the world. In the 1936 Olympics held in Berlin, Hitler wished to show the superiority of Nazi ideology for all the world to see. So it brings us great satisfaction to remember that African-American track and field star Jesse Owens brought home not one, but 4 gold medals. Because for us, the idea of a master race is explicitly abhorrent, and we cast judgment upon it. It is obvious, out in the open, for all to see. Of course, there's no such thing as a master race with greater strength and intelligence and ability than any other. But implicitly, things are a bit different. In the same year that Jesse Owens won those gold medals, he freely entered German restaurants of his choice and used whatever form of public transportation in 1936 Germany that he found necessary. And these are the very same things he was denied in the segregated deep south of his home country, which he represented. There is the explicit and there is the implicit. Explicitly, we know there's not a master Aryan race, of course. But just last year, a good friend of mine in polite company, sitting next to me on the couch during an NFL football game, he said that blacks don't make very good quarterbacks because they don't analyze things well and they have trouble communicating with their white teammates. There is the explicit and there is the implicit. The explicit states the obvious, yet the implicit often goes unnoticed. Recall the founders who penned the eloquent words, "All men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights." Yet these founders still managed to count slaves as only 3/5 of a person. Perhaps this irony is most readily seen in figures like Jefferson and Washington and Madison, all of whom are on record for believing that slavery was explicitly abhorrent and wrong, and that the slave trade should be abolished as quickly as possible. Yet at the same time these words were coming out of their mouths or being set to paper, each of these figures owned slaves, profited from them, and refused to give them up. There is the explicit and there is the implicit. Explicitly, I am a preacher standing here today speaking on the dynamics of race in America. And much of what I want to say today is that any kind of racism, explicit or implicit, is, if not equal in degree, still threatening to the well-being of society, both individually and collectively. But implicitly, I am a preacher standing here today, speaking on the dynamics of race in America, who carries the baggage and prejudices of being a white man conditioned in and by our culture, and such implicit bias and prejudice, which lurks beneath the surface, it can't help but influence my own experiences and perspectives. This is a sensitive topic to talk about, to be sure, not least of which because of our own prejudices, biases, and human fallibility, all of which leads to limited vision and perspective. Now, scholars often teach about the implicit nature of our observations and feelings, most of which are constructed more on cultural conditioning than on the use of reason. In other words, a lot of times what we're born into, we don't have a lot of control over. You know, there are things, these scholars tell us, that we cognitively, reasonably, explicitly know that there's no such thing as a master race and that slavery is wrong. Of course we know that. Yet our cultural conditioning, that which is beyond the use of reason, that which we're born into and surrounds us, also leaves one prone to feel that African Americans don't make very good quarterbacks, even though the last several years has produced Donovan McNabb, Steve McNair, Vince Young, and many others. Now, we see this operate on several different levels. Some are more serious than others. The stand-up comedian Chris Rock has a great bit on this. You might remember back in 2000 when Colin Powell was vying for the Republican presidential nomination. Well, one of the regular compliments that was given Powell was that he speaks so well. He speaks so well. Now, Chris Rock has a great bit on this in his routine. It's much better than what I'm going to try to do, so just bear with me. I'm not Chris Rock, but I'm going to try to convey, what I can through my own words, or actually his words, me delivering them. Okay, Chris Rock says, he speaks so well. Like that's a compliment. Speak so well is not a compliment. What voice were you looking to come out of his mouth? What did you expect him to sound like? I'm going to drop me a bomb today. I'll be President. He speaks so well is not a compliment. You remember Senator Joe Biden last year? Whenever Barack Obama declared that he was running for president, and Biden said that Obama had a real chance to win because he was the first African-American man running who was what? So clean and articulate. Did you think a African-American man running for office couldn't put a sentence together? And Joe Biden is a very educated man born into this culture. Now, has anyone ever said something to you like, I was having lunch the other day at Applebee's, and I've just got to tell you, I had the nicest black waiter. Now, what does being black have to do with that? I mean, did they expect that their black waiter was going to come up to the table and say, give me your order. Give me your order. There's the explicit and there is the implicit. Explicitly, we know that Mein Kampf is a racist book. Obviously. But sitting at home on the bookshelves of my study is Britannica's 54-volume series, Great Books of the Western World. And every single one of the 54 classic seminal volumes is authored by a Eurocentric white male. These are the works that have shaped Western culture.